Hello, guys. Okay, so I've been helping out a couple of friends with the SAT. Without further ado, let me show you how exactly to crush the verbal section, the reading and writing. This is test number 6 of the non-linear, so the PDF version that the College Board provides. I'll provide a link in the description where to access this, but this is based on the digital SAT for 2024, so this is the most up-to-date questions for the SAT. I've already gone through and done this module, and I did end up scoring a perfect score on it, but there were some really tricky questions, and I think my test-taking abilities helped me more than anything else. I'm a little older than you guys who are actually taking the SAT. I've taken the GMAT, which is a different exam, but I took this exam like 10 years ago, and there's been a lot of changes that I'll touch on. But more specifically, I want to convey to you the same techniques I've researched for the family friends I've been helping out. And I think it'll really help, especially for some of the guys who understand all the logic and all of the words in here but struggle to get like really high scores. I think they're the ones who are going to benefit the most. But in general, if you don't quite understand what persuasive writing is about, or if you don't quite understand how to answer what seems subjective and verbal, that's really what we're going to touch on. Like, this is not subjective, it's very objective, and there are certain things and certain patterns that will help you so much in answering these questions correctly, but then also understanding in the future how to attack a test in general. But anyways, you'll see that I've gone through and highlighted key portions, and I even have some little phrases that will help us stay in the right mindset and remember what types of questions are being asked and what the SAT in 2024 is looking for. So generally speaking, it's going to start off pretty easy. So here, when you read this sentence, one thing to keep in mind is these sentences all mean something, these phrases, these paragraphs. While you're not supposed to add anything to it, you want to envision a big black box around all of these questions. You don't want any new information coming in other than quote unquote standard English or some of the other things they mention. But we want a logical and precise word, right? That's going to be the common question type when you face this. This is essentially a vocab question. So one thing to understand with vocab questions is often if they come with these prepositions, these connector words, they can help you to identify what is going on. Let's real quick read this. Just in a vacuum, the hedgehog, tenrex, some animal, it doesn't matter which one, some animal of Madagascar, animals, by the way, this is plural, share basic examples of true hedgehogs. So when you think about what this one inserted here would actually mean, it would mean that these animals here are sharing examples. Not that they're sharing traits, which say over here, it just means something different than what's being said here. The answer is similarities, by the way. And what I was talking about the preposition is when you share basic indications of, it almost implies that these animals are doing the sharing, not that they have something in common. So the answer is actually going to be D, similarities with. Okay. In another, this is another vocab question, essentially. One thing to look for in the modern SAT is if you don't know what a word means, you generally can still figure it out, like what's being looked for through synonyms, through the structure of the paragraph, and then eliminate the 3 that don't fit that pattern. So here, we're looking at this sentence where someone identifies an increasing sense of blank, okay? In contrast, something was less deliberately signaled. So there's a double negative here, right? So the sentence is structured to where something in contrast was less deliberately signaled. So we're really just looking for a word that means deliberately signaled. Feel free to pause this, by the way, at any time and answer the questions yourself. Like I said, this is module 1 of practice test 6 on the College Board website. So if I'm going a bit fast, feel free to go at your own pace. But the answer is going to be overtly. the reason that this is easily the answer is if you put any of the other words, and by the way, if you don't know what they mean, they're not going to fit the tone and the structure of this sentence. But more so than that, they're telling you with a synonym through two, a double negative, but it's essentially telling you what the word needs to mean. So if you know that overtly is very deliberate, it's obviously be. And it'll help. Let's say you don't know what overtly means. If you know prudently means very, like, carefully, very, properly, that doesn't really fit. Cordially is very formally. That doesn't really fit either. And inadvertently is literally the opposite meaning of deliberate. So if you misread this sentence and miss the double negative here, the in contrast and the less, then you might pick inadvertently. So be careful on that, but the answer is B, overtly. All right, moving along. So here again, I've gone through, and this one I actually struggled with because I thought I knew the meaning of preclude, and I did know it, but I wasn't sure when I took this the first time. So one of the ways I answered this, ended up answering it correctly, like a little bit of a guess, but we're looking for a word that essentially the scholars have recently begun expanding their focus away from the adults. So this is a weird sentence to where expanding their focus is not what the synonym is. It's actually recently begun. Because scholars have recently begun, this too kind of changes the meaning of the sentence now. What the scholars are doing now that's different than before is they've started to do something. So we're looking for something that means that, basically, like start to do, or like before you didn't, but now you do. So epitomize doesn't really fit that, so I crossed it out for you guys. Exacerbating doesn't really fit that, so I crossed it out. Preclude means something like prevent. So it's actually, again, the opposite of what the actual answer is. I wasn't sure what redress actually meant. You can kind of guess, but when I answered this question, that is what I guessed, and this is, in fact, the right answer. Okay, so in any of these passage questions, make sure that you read the line up here, or whatever information's up here. Here the narrator's riding in a taxi down a street with vendors and shoppers, right? So the question is, what does disputing mean in this context? And here they were now in blue, disputing every inch. To dispute is to argue, right? So you could easily pick argue, but that's not what it means as used in this text. Because we're reading this up here, we actually can see the setting. And when you reread this, here they were now in blue. They were disputing them not physically, but because they were in their way. The street is lined with food vendors, right? So it's really actually more closely providing resistance to our passage. See how kind of visualizing this in your head should help you answer this correctly? Because if you just looked at it, the closest, and this is how they're trying to trick you, the closest meaning to dispute in general, like the most common meaning, is going to be argue. You could even disapprove if you're not careful. You could pick any of these. Asserting possession of doesn't make sense, so please don't pick that one. But you want to read the text and always answer within context. Okay, this is another one where it was actually kind of tricky for me because this is more about logic than knowing what the meaning of the words are. I think most people know these four words: controversial, antagonistic, imitated, and inconsequential. But really here we're trying to frame an argument. That's really what this type of question is about. So recent scholarship, sure. Anytime you see this type of thing, just insert in your head scientist or historian or whatever, doctor, like whatever it is. So recent historians have recently said that blank that has undermined claims, yep, or blank other, okay. So recently something has indicated that something is no longer true. That's kind of what this is saying. A claim is something that is thought to be true, and if something has undermined that, it is no longer thought to be true. So it is indisputable is kind of saying, okay, this thing that was thought to not really be true still might be true because of this. So we're thinking of like an idea that leads to whatever is being presented in the second half of the argument. Here, it kind of says that his works were far away from the center of thought. This is really interesting because you kind of have to read into it. You have to read into it that it's trying to tell you that it's unimportant. So which one of these is best fitting unimportant? Because remember, there's an undermine here, so that indicates even though this type of thing is like this whole idea appears different than what's down here, the blank actually conveys the similar idea to what's down here. And that's going to end up being inconsequential. Okay, number 6. Let me zoom out a little bit so you guys can see everything. Okay, so there's no information up here, so that's fine. These function questions are essentially talking about paragraph structure. So it's like one level deeper than a summary or a main idea, but it's not that hard to understand. So let's just read the underlined part for a second. A lot of these, especially the easier ones, you don't really need to read everything if you're just very specific and accurate about the words being used. You'll see why I've crossed some of this out in just a second. Let's read the line. Turning away from landscapes painted in a style, expressionist style, a style that often involves doing this stuff, to express the experience of reality from the artist. Okay, Johnson began painting portraits in a bold new way. Okay, so let's just look at what these things say. It recounts a moment in Johnson's personal life. It doesn't do that. There's no specific moment. There's no mention of personal life. So just in terms of specificity, like being specific and correct, this just can't be the answer. Let's look at part D. It prevents evidence that calls into question it doesn't call into question anything. You know, if you read the structure of this, it supports what's up here, so that doesn't work. We haven't even read anything really. We just, read the single line and then we're able to do it based on what was included and what wasn't. And finally, it provides information about Johnson's travels. Well, it doesn't do that. So it's probably going to be A no matter what. Let's just make sure that A is the right answer. If you go back and read it, it tells a story about this painter who traveled in Europe and then his style changed. And so a transitional moment in this artist's career, and then it elaborates on that. Checks out to me. That answer is A. Okay, so main purpose of the text is a little different than main idea. Main idea, you're going to be summarizing the information. The main purpose is something more akin to what or how the writer is trying to tell something to the audience. You can go through and read this. This one's more about like holding on to the details, and the answer ends up being pretty straightforward once you find those details. And it's to assert that the artist's performances look easy, apparent ease, because of how she prepares, due to tremendous amount of preparation. Pretty reasonable to get that answer right, but you do have to like keep track of the details. They're trying to trick you with a lot of words and a lot of just jargon. So try to make it almost a skeleton where you're just, viewing it very simply, looking for details and trying to answer the very specific question being asked. Okay, so this is an interesting question. I would pause it and go through this one yourself. I've crossed out a couple of things that just weren't mentioned in the underlined part. So even if you're not familiar with like old-timey speech, you should be able to figure out that these answers are wrong because they specifically say things that just weren't included in the underlined portion, right? So we're basically left with B and D just based on the basis of that. So if we read deeper into the paragraph, we find that it doesn't really say that the guy undertakes courageous act. It almost says the opposite of that. So the answer is going to be B. I'll leave this one for you to go read through, but some of these longer passages, and there's a reason they structure the test this way, you'll go from a very like short question type to these longer passages, and part of the difficulty in the exam is like trusting your focus and being able to change gears and go from like a long passage where you have to skim a lot of information ideally to a short passage where every little word matters. So these are just things that you need to practice a little bit and you'll get a little better over time. But anyways, so these text 1 versus text 2, almost always it's going to be how would text 2 respond to either the conventional wisdom or the conclusion, the hypothesis. So first of all, make sure that you understand the question. Here it's a claim, okay? Generally, the claims are supposed to be true, so don't try to read into like what they're even talking about. We're just trying to figure out how, assuming this guy believes this and this guy believes this, how would this guy address this statement, right? So if you see the parts I've highlighted and read through it, you'll notice that the parts I've marked out here are just strictly wrong. He doesn't, text 2 would not reject the idea that the audiences would enjoy an updated version because he supports that. He even gives an example. It can't be that. And C is almost tricky, but he doesn't specifically ever mention income. When they say these very specific words and mention things, even dance companies is dicey, but he does eventually say dance companies at some point. Like everything has to be addressed. He never says income. He never alludes to the actual money being made. He just said that audiences can enjoy it and dance companies can produce it. So it can't really be C. And just having said that, I think it becomes pretty clear that the answer is D, because he really is supporting the idea that this Nutcracker, this play or ballet could be remade for a modern audience, but he never actually talks about money. Okay. 10 is what is the main idea of the text. So you can go through and read this. I've marked out a few answer choices because they just never talked about it. And one thing that we want to key in on is for answer choice B, when it says more often, if it doesn't ever make that comparison in the paragraph, this answer choice can't be true. It has to be specifically true and accurate at all times. Like everything, every word, every meaning said in the answer choice needs to be able to be found in the black box that is the passage. So the same thing, they never talked about the difficulty replicating anything, so it can't be B or C. And A is interesting because it almost sounds like a main idea, but they didn't demonstrate anything essential. If it said that they demonstrated it was essential, that might be true, but they never said the word essential. They never even alluded to the idea, so it probably can't be that either. We're really only left with D, which is the correct answer. So 11's interesting. If you look at the graph just very briefly, you want to kind of read the answer, like the passage first and figure out what they're framing. So very quickly, it's from 1910 to 1925. So it's the entire period. Just very briefly, we can see this number going up, this number going down, right? When you have a lot of time, you're going to read all this and skim it and understand the information a little better. I'm just trying to show you how even in a pinch, even with just bare bones test taking techniques, you can pretty easily get the right answer. So both were unchanged. That's clearly incorrect. And also, both of them didn't do the same thing. They did strictly opposite things. So in general, both the numbers of cars and the numbers of companies increased. We just said they did opposite things. So anything that says both of them did the same thing just can't be the answer. And then here it says one of them was unchanged. That's also not true. So just based on what the answer choices say, B, C, and D are probably not right. Let's make sure A is right. The number of cars increased, sure, and the number of companies decreased, yes. So A is the right answer. But see how much easier it is when you can just eliminate answer choices based on the specific words they've used, because those specific words are not available in the passage or anywhere in the question. Okay. This is another 12 and 13 are just another one of those. They're trying to get you by just reading a lot of nonsense. Let's read the question first. We don't have to read the answer choices yet. Let's just read the question. Ideally, you want to read the question, then read the passage, and then start eliminating answer choices. But again, if you're really experienced with the exam, you could probably just eliminate answer choices right off the bat. So you need to, when it says response or quote or statement, it's essentially the same thing as if assumed to be true, which of these statements supports the hypothesis or claim or whatever. So once you understand that this is just a hypothesis or claim question. So go look at the hypothesis and get super specific. The researchers explain, explanation, sure, same thing, conclusion. The point is that we need to find what their exact claim was, and the answer has to be centered around that. So their exact claim is that shoppers go through the store and then that increases their likelihood of buying something else. So C talks about a coupon. That's a tricky answer choice because they talk about a coupon up here, but not down here. That's not correct. Choice D, store is larger. They never talk about store size in the explanation. For sure, no, and not in the whole paragraph at all. It can't be C or D. I didn't buy everything. I couldn't find a couple of items. That sounds like it almost might be true, but it doesn't talk about buying an item and exposing more products. If you look at A, it fulfills all of those. And just by default, we're kind of left with mostly A anyways. Everything else just doesn't seem to fit. And it has to fit. It has to be exact. I would argue that the verbal sometimes is probably more objective than the math. In the math, if you make a small mistake, you could, like, they could trick you and you could just pick the wrong choice under pressure. In the verbal, if you're a quick reader, you should have enough time and you should be able to feel an answer is not right once you have experience with the exam in a way that you can't feel with the math side. So this is not a subjective, it is very objective, and I'm just trying to show you how. So 13 here, one thing you want to get specific with is directly support the underlying claim. See, these are basically the same question. Even though this is a statement and a quote or whatever, and this is a underlying claim, we need to get specific about what the claim is and like what the statement is like talking about. So here they specifically talk about diverse media and artists have depicted and engaged with experience. If it doesn't have diverse media in the answer choice, it cannot be the answer choice. So nothing about the media type, nothing about diverse media. It tries, it talks about multiple works and multiple sources, but not about diverse media types. A lot of artists, no diverse media types. Oh, look, diverse media types. Just from elimination alone, remember, we're directly supporting, not undermining, so it's pretty straightforward. It's going to be A. I think I'm going to make this video a part 1, and then I'll introduce a part 2 later. But I'm going to leave you with this question to kind of get specific with. This is question 14. So this is a tricky question, actually. One of the things that helped me get this one took me a little while when I originally took the exam last week, is what is the researcher's exact conclusion? Their exact conclusion refers to longer leave times and shorter leave times. It never talks about no leave at all. It doesn't, it's not part of the claim. It's not part of the comparison, right? So I want you to go through this question and see if you can answer it without that little, I mean, you have the tip now, but see if you can read through it and figure out why, like how difficult this question would be to really fully read through and then answer, and then see how when you remove the answer choices that include the concept of no leave, even though the claim didn't, you're left with C, which is the right answer. So anyways, this will be part 1, and then I'll make a part 2 later. Yeah, good luck with the SAT, and then we'll catch up on questions 15 onwards next time.
got off for your stop and my stock sudden drop. I'm a trusted doorstopper, a paperweight taciturn. In